Every episode celebrates original content written by real people who experience real emotions. I'm Rayanne Thorn Krueger. Welcome to Real Words. Well, so exciting to announce that we have a resident poet at Real Words. I'm very excited to welcome back our very first guest, Martin Burns, who has agreed to be my resident poet here on the Real Words podcast. Hey, Martin, thanks for joining me again.
Sure. Well, welcome. Thanks for having me. And my resident Rayanne has me locked in this room.
Yes, I do.
So she gave me books at least. So at least I'm allowed to have those.
He's allowed
Food,
to have
food
books.
would be good. I do need lunch at some point, just so
Okay,
you
I'll
know.
make sure some gets slid under the door just for you. There will be no notes going out, though. No one is coming to save you. You
That's fine.
are committed to being a resident poet here at Real Words. And I have to tell you a really funny story. I had already messaged you about doing this, about being part of the cast of players at Real Words, and I was interviewing William Wiggins, who is a mutual friend of ours, and he could not stop talking about our episode. He just said over and over, "I just can't believe Martin knows all this stuff, and he should put on a clinic." So I was very happy to inform him that yes, that's in the works. And so, welcome to the Real Words family. I'm so excited to have you part of this and to share your knowledge. Give us a background of yourself before we jump in. I do have some questions for you, and we have a couple of topics to picked out to discuss in this premiere episode with our resident, our premier resident, anybody here on, aside from Rayanne. You're the premier resident expert on poetry for Real Words. So tell us why you deserve to be an expert.
Well, I don't know if there's a good answer for that. Um, Now, this might be one area where I could probably claim some level of expertise just because I've been
Yes.
reading about it for a very long time in my life, and working at it. So, yeah, everything else I do, it's sort of, is he or isn't he? But in this area, I feel some level of comfort, I guess. Uh, and it's also, side note, good to know I will have cellmates coming in later on as there are more residents get locked up here. Be good. We can like knock on the wall back and forth. So yeah, background. I'll skip the career stuff because that's not as relevant, I think, to the conversation. Yeah, I've used my writing in my career to help buttress it, frankly, a lot. But in terms of how I got into this piece of my life, good question. Yeah, I've always been a reader, way back. Just like a lot of us are, I think. As I was reading way ahead of my level, yada yada. You just got lost in books quite often, and the books were my happy place. The library was my other happy place. You know, I probably was not playing ball as much as I should have been. But I was into reading and the books and all of that. Right? And not that I didn't, but it was definitely a preference. So there was that, and I somewhere along the way I started messing around with words and my own words, writing pieces here and there. And my first recollection of writing a poem just out of the blue, and I think it happened before this, but the one that really meant to me, my grandfather passed away, my father's father, and they were very close. And I was close with my grandfather too. So one of those things that trigger something, and it came out in the form of a poem. So I happened to show it to a teacher I had in eighth grade. This wonderful woman named Mrs. Lovett. She's phenomenal, interesting human, literary, etc. And I knew she liked to read and she enjoyed poetry, so I'd written it and admired her. She and my mother were friends, or our families were friends, yada yada. So there was comfort there beyond simply being a teacher. I shared it with her, and she loved it and said, "Please keep doing this." So I kept writing, and I'd bring her pieces, and she'd work me through with it, and that kind of got me moving into it. And so then from there, I went to high school, and it was something I was doing that I was good at, and not being very athletic. It was something I could go to and feel, hey, I'm good at this, right? Uh, so there was some of that. And it was just a way of sort of working through a lot of emotions that I was working through as a teenager, all the stuff that happens. And I keep saying I'm bad about that. I'm better writing clearly than I'm speaking. but it's uncomfortable to talk about all this as well because you're talking about yourself, your real self, which is what Real
Right.
Words is about. Right? I
That's
can talk
exactly right.
fluently about myself as a careerist, but then I'm describing almost someone else. So, but the writing kept happening, and you get involved with typical things in high school. I was poetry editor of the literary magazine in high school. We had a wonderful staff working with us. Actually, the person who ran our public high school English department was a PhD from Brown who'd been paralyzed in college. He'd gone to Needham High School, had been a star athlete, volunteered dressing kids back from camp during the last polio outbreak. Long story short, paralyzed and wanted to get back to the community. So went after getting a PhD, went back to teach at the high school level. So that created a really, just by pure luck on my part, phenomenal public high school English department that I had access to. It was
Wow.
all about writing. So, and everyone who went through it, and it bled across the curriculum. So if you were in history, if you were other classes, you were writing papers. The point that kids I knew in high school who felt they weren't very good writers would go to college, and their dorm mates would ask them to help them work on papers and give them advice. So it was just that sort of thing that happened to happen. It was great. My parents are readers themselves. My father was a very huge reader, sensitive guy, very gentle. It encouraged me. Your mother, same way. That she was the more athletic one of the two, which is kind of a fun. But they really encouraged their kids to pursue their dreams and their passions and and all that. So I had that fertile kind of ground with sort of childhood trauma baked into it and some skill, and that I think wrapped together pushed me more into it, and I felt safer writing poetry. Went to college, went for a writing degree, and found only put a college that had really well-known writing programs where you could focus on poetry during the program. Which, look, this is huge kudos to my parents that they didn't say you're majoring in writing poetry. What the are you doing this with our money? So, and admittedly, I was a little financial aid. I was working, so it was my money too, I guess, sort of.
Yeah.
But they were supportive. They didn't fight it, and the program was solid. There were some good people there, fellow writers, students who are still writing themselves, but many of them good staff. My advisor had been sort of tutored by Charles Olson, who was a fairly phenomenal and important poet in American history. Not as well known, kind of broadly, not like a Robert Frost level of knowing, but Charles Olson is one of the massive minds of the 20th century in writing, mid 20th century, and he had been and Creeley, Robert Creeley was part of that crew as well, so he knew the beatniks and all that. There was this whole kind of like web of connection that goes back to Pound down to Yates, etc. So there's a sort of this weird sort of path of knowledge that I was again getting access to in this remote place in the woods in upstate New York. So the education was there, the proclivities were there, and then the student loans were there later, and when you write a villanelle and mail it to Sally Mae, they write back a note saying that's not money. So, you um,
No, I don't suppose that would work. I
no,
would have tried
like
that had I known.
I tried some fun limericks that got me a restraining order. So, but the point is I had to get a job. So I did that and chose that path. But along the way, I've just kind of kept at it. It was a it, habit, like not occupation, I guess, emotional occupation, maybe. A fascination with it. The education I got at St. Lawrence just happened to be very, very good around poetics, and same with Needham High School. So I had that baked in desire to learn more about it. So I've kept doing that. Stayed involved with
Well,
various poetry circles. I meet with poets and I read, I write, all that kind of
yeah.
stuff. So
I love that you've been so prolific online, digitally sharing your poetry, which is how I discovered that you were a poet. And I'm really thankful for your background and that I can take advantage of it, and the viewers and listeners of Real Words can take advantage of it because I do feel like we can learn more about this craft, this art. From you, this style of writing. And I've been writing poetry forever, but without any time. I mean, I've taken a few classes, but without the pure construct that you have been through that has developed your craft. And so, thank you, first of all,
Mhm.
for agreeing to do this and allowing me to learn from you. For you to be the poet laureate here at Real Words is an amazing opportunity
Probably the
for
first and
me.
last time I've recalled that. Thank
I
you. I'm going to
don't
keep that in my
I
head
don't think
forever.
so. Good. Well, I appreciate it, and I've thought a lot about our very first conversation about this topic. Was really interesting to me, and it clearly struck a chord with others. And I've since then, I've learned a lot about AI since then because it's been there now that I've started this project and wanted to learn more about what's ahead of us as creators. And poetry, I think, remains an area where it will require a human, although you can plug in to ChatGPT 4.0. You can plug in, hey, write me a poem about this, and it will create a rap about this, do a limerick about this, and it will. But I really feel like this is the the area of love, of loss, of sadness, of fear, of elation, of joy, of plenty, of uh, uh, seeking, seeking, right? Sinking all of those things that I just mentioned through poetry, through writing, has to come from a human heart and from a human mind. One question I asked you in our last conversation was about empathy, right? Do you believe that you have to have empathy in order to write poetry? And I still believe that this is something that is necessary for us to maintain our humanity. When we think about how writing started, the etchings on a cave wall, those first etchings. My son just sent me, or was it my son? I can't remember. Somebody sent me the first song that was ever recorded or written was on this stone tablet from years and years ago, and they were able to decipher it and play the tune and the chanting that accompanied this. And I just
Wow.
found it so, I'll send it to you and I'll post it here, but it so brilliant to know that we as humans have been doing this for so long. We have
Mhm.
been creating and putting our heart out there,
Mhm.
whether it's through music or through poetry or through other kinds of writing or creating art. And this ties in so well with your other comment about the sculpting, right? You
Yep.
said you're being a block of stone. I mean, you could throw this all out there and that's the block of stone, but then to really make it art, to be an artist in this format, you have to really chip away at it and complete it. You have to complete the picture with your words. And so beautifully told. And I loved sharing that clip over and over again. And it is by far one of the most watched clips from any of the podcasts here at Real Words. So I thank you for
Yeah,
sharing
of
that. I,
course.
I really
Of
appreciate
course.
it. So there are all kinds of poetry, right? And when
Mhm.
I did some initial research, the first thing that popped up, there are 9 kinds of poetry. I'm not going to list them all because we're going to talk about all of them eventually, but I want to talk about 2 specific kinds because I think most people who understand poetry know that there is rhyming poetry, and that can fit
Mhm.
into all the other different kinds of poetry, like limericks or sonnets or anything like that can rhyme. And then there's free verse, which I love. I've written both rhyming, but free verse is where I dwell and have written so much of that. And I know that you do that too. Um, what where Tell me a little bit about these types of poetry. What do they mean, each of them mean, and why are they different? Why are they alike?
Mhm. So I think it's easier to think about in terms of structure, right? If you, it's rhyming, non-rhyming, metered, non-metered, etc. That's the delivery mechanism in a way of the thought and the way you're structuring the words. And I don't want to say it's the mechanics, but it's not like they're totally separate. It's just more they're more sort of the systems. And by that I mean that if you're using rhymes and you're going with hard rhymes at the end, I don't do that very often. I try occasionally, and I'll be honest, I'm just not good at it. It's a real skill to be able to, it's high level if that's your focus area, to be able to deliver, a good meaning, metaphor, process, and and sort of a narrative, if that's what you're, no matter how you're structuring it, while also staying within a hard rhyme. That's just tough to do, right? Um, when you think about some examples, I mean, Shakespeare's the obvious one,
Right.
yeah, right? But Gwendolyn Brooks, Langston Hughes, for more contemporary, there's that, and that's beautifully written, and it's almost a song quite often. Even Shakespeare, you
Right.
look at, you can
Right.
sort of singable. I mean, the way the rhythms are, and that I think is what's powerful about that is that it does evoke. Go looping back to your point about the first, songs ever found. You think about animal language, primate language, and nature. They're rhyming. There are rhythms in there. A bird song. It's a rhythm,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
So clearly, rhythm means something, right? There's more to it than simply hey, these rhyme. That the actual sound you get out of it transform the poem, can make it drive forward, can make it move in a certain way. And so you can choose to employ that if you are, I want to go for something that will have this kind of flow and be like a river and be like sort of songish almost, because that the repetition can really be powerful. Um, you Speaking of Langston Hughes, you think about blues music, right? That kind of call and response, boom, 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 boom,
Right.
boom. There's
Right.
something in there that can match the human heart to a certain extent. And just to bring another example in, 'cause I'm all over the place today, apparently, as I tend to be, not just today. There's they've I forget where this was, but I believe it was in Africa. There was a tribe, that has a traditional, it's a dance they do with drums, and they drum faster and faster. Dancers you dance faster and faster, and eventually they studied this. When the drummers stop, the dancers all fall down because their heart rate had become synced to the drums. When drummers stop, suddenly their hearts stop for a second and they just collapse.
Wow.
So there is definitely, you studied this has been, studied in a lot of different ways, that there is definitely that kind of rhythmic an impact on us at a physical level that a well-written rhyming poem can get to. Not the same way. It's not going to give you a heart attack. Maybe it could work on that. You can weaponize my poems, but it's the idea that you can really get deeply into kind of the physical with that kind of an approach. It's hard to do, and also it really does limit your abilities because you're forced to only work with words that rhyme. And unless you have a really strong grasp of the broad English language or wherever you're writing in, it's challenging to find words that they're all that rhyme and are different in poem after poem. Your vocabulary kind of constrains you when you're doing that. So that said, you can cheat and use words that almost rhyme here and there and fudge them a bit the way they're kind of presented. But that's sort of rhyming. I think it can be powerful, but it's hard to do and it has limitations, right? Um, on the flip side, with free verse, you've got, which is where I tend to spend more time. It's I think a good analogy of free verse is yoga. Again, I'm a writer. I'm all about metaphors and analogies. So in yoga, when you see someone who is incredibly flexible, their legs up around their head, whatever else, and they're
Right.
always in class doing incredible things, that person is in serious physical danger typically, because that little flexibility means you are constantly over flexing. You think you can do it, you're born with long hamstrings basically. You're just physically born with long hamstrings, so you can just do more. You can stretch farther just naturally. The problem is you're hurting your joints doing that. So when you're older, you wind up with real damage. There's something that's taught in yoga, a lot of yoga classes, that you have to, at least by good yogis, the ones who are crappy will encourage you because they can get photos for their yoga studio wall. But if a good yogi will make sure that those people know when to stop flexing and mentally control it. Here's the how related to free verse. It's similar in that way that you can stretch anywhere. The trick is not to go wild with it because then you lose your pose basically, if that makes sense. It's almost too easy to just kind of write and write and write. When I think about people who examples I mean, there's Walt Whitman, who was sort of one of the founders of free verse, not the founders, it's been around forever, but modern kind of considered one of the modern founders of free verse and what's of getting away from kind of traditional rhyming verse and all that. Yeah, there's Nick Giovanni
I
by any
don't.
chance? Okay, it's Nikkivio. Look it up. I have a note. Viovanni. Yeah, she's here's like ego tripping. One of her poems, ego tripping, is phenomenal, and it uses free verse in a way that keeps the constraint, but really looks at identity, heritage, things like that. There's Worcestershire, Warsan, and then Shire like the Shire, who's looking at migration and internet trauma using free verse. Again, a phenomenal writer. I'm kind of giving these books free plugs, so I like them
Sure,
as
sure.
writers too. But again, it's you can create a narrative that is beautiful. You can really go pretty far with the style, but at some point it becomes prose if you aren't careful. You're basically writing a novel. Might be a beautiful novel, beautiful prose, but you go or it could simply be that you're just blathering on and on, and that's the real
Right,
risk with free verse. With a rhyme structure, you're forced to constrain yourself. And here's the clinic. Right, let's go into the clinic part of this now, if you don't mind.
yes, yeah,
Um, I recommend to everyone out there, if you really want to understand your writing and how to get to the point where you're chipping away at the stone, the big book of block, the block of stone that's all the verse. Now you got to pull it back a bit. You have to learn your forms. There are lots of forms of poetry. Some rhymed, some not. Some that have internal rhymes within them. There's the classics like sonnets. There are villanelles. There's all kinds of obscure ones and interesting ones. Reason you want to do that and spend time just as an exercise, it's sort of like warming up, or you're doing your forms in martial arts or yoga or whatnot. It's repetitive, but it's foundational stuff, and it can really train your mind to get better when you say, "I'm going to write something." There are things that you've trained in your head somewhere that will automatically help you sort of see the rhythm better, because forms have rhythms baked into them, right? They're structured. You have to rhyme line A with line C, but in the middle word. I mean, it's almost like doing puzzles sometimes,
right.
but there is training in there. And it's meant to be that it becomes muscle or mind memory. So if you're looking for a really good resource, my favorite, it's Louis Turcot's. It's Louis Turco. Is it LU or LEW? I gotta look this up. I'm just not looking at my copy on my shelf right now because I'm not. I mean, I am in the book room. Hang on. Let's see. Yeah, LEW. So it's LEWIS Turco, and we can include this in the notes later or whatever. PURCO. And his book is the New Book of Forms.
Okay.
It's a couple things. It is first off, it is just there's a what half the book is just here are all the forms that are available. Here's the history. Here's the structure. There's also about a half the book that goes into why forms are helpful and the history of poetry, who's done them. It's good, just good to read for the history, but having as a reference on your bookshelf, and I've given it away, I think, a dozen times in my life. It's 32 copies. It's just a really good primer, kind of going back to your basics. If you're working out and you're like, hey, I got to get back to kind of just the mat a bit, or I have to get back on the bench, just do some basic stuff. It's that kind of a thing. It's just something you can do every once in a while. Writing forums, they may come out terrible. I don't like my villanelles typically, for example. You'll rarely see them get me published them, but they're really good workouts, essentially.
So, what's a villanelle?
Villanelle it's a French style. It's you have to have it's the most famous style that you'll probably know is Dylan Thomas. You'll not go
Oh,
into
yes,
that doc, yeah. And
yes.
it's so it's essentially you have to you're using the same words at the end of each line in a certain pattern and then mixing them up. And the last two lines, I believe, are all the words from the end words in two lines, two sentences.
Okay.
Right. So you have to be very deliberate with it. It really, really forces you to almost work from your last two lines.
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah. But it's so structured that you really are forced to think about how do these words work together and interplay. You learn things from using forms in general. You learn about internal rhymes, which are, I think, fairly important to understand. That's the real rhythm within your, because you may not be rhyming every N word, but there should be internal rhyming happening within your lines here and there. The words that can kind of bounce off each other,
It's important
again and
to
against.
the rhythm. So as
Hmm.
you as the reader can be sucked in much like we are to music because of the
Hmm.
rhythm of the words, how the words
Yeah,
flow, how we're reading them
yeah,
in our heads or reading them
yeah,
out loud.
yeah.
Amazing.
It's like and again we begin. That's yeah, that right there. Just boom, boom, boom. But it's those kind of those. That's again the rhythm. That's the sort of the piece, the push of it, I guess.
Are commas important? Because I'm a big fan of commas.
I mean, Oxford
And
commas are really important, but that's a whole different discussion.
right, right.
Um,
I agree.
um, well, it's like the whole lawsuit in Maine said with
Right.
the main dairy company settled that a couple of years ago. But commas, I tend to think that using them habitually, it's a comma is a pause. If you
Right.
want folks to read your line and then pause and read your line and then pause, then you are telling them the rhythm is only this line and this line, or the rhythm is boom, pause, boom, pause, or boom, 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 pause, boom, 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 pause. So it can become like machine guns. So do you want to break up the flow all the time?
Right.
It's more a matter of how does it sound as it's coming out, right? And using things like dashes and commas where they matter. On the flip side, there's E Cummings, and that worked too.
Right.
So you can go kind of wild if you're going away from punctuation and just not using it, or you want to use it very creatively. Make sure you read writers who've done that well already and understand and start understanding why and how they've done it. It's not something you just sort of do arbitrarily. It's a decision, right? You have to. It's almost philosophical in a way, but it's about how do the words spill on the page. Really.
It's interesting when you once you begin to read or study poetry and you come across a free verse poem
Mhm.
that looks differently when you're reading it in
Mhm.
your head, looks differently than when you read it aloud, right?
Yes.
So I think sometimes it's hard for a reader to decipher exactly how the rhythm should be because of how the poet has situated the words, right? They
Right.
may put a
Right.
break where it doesn't seem logical to put a break, right? So, do you have any insight into why a poet might do that? Why they would put a break there where there is not an obvious break when if you were just to read the words and they were written in a paragraph form instead of in their chosen form of poetry? Why would a poet choose to change emphasis by writing it a certain way?
So let me give you an example. Copy this. Yeah, this is Jess Mines, who's brilliant. It's one of those poems. That didn't come across good at all. Never mind. Well, it's terrible. But it's basically I think it's three or four words per line separated. So it's brick bag halo strike cloth ribe absence wet cuts pit making shallow amends more orange and yearning. It's what we was doing there was he was painting an abstract image with colors. You would this what does the sky look like when I'm looking up at it? And so he was doing line by line, all lowercase, just to make it seem almost like a meditation. Like what am I looking at? It's this, now it's this, now it's this. And what makes sense. So in that case, he was sort of doing almost like dreamlike. And I wish I could show it
Yeah.
better in that
Yeah.
chat. But others will do something like Charles Olson did. Let's see. Charles Olson is hard. I mean, you want someone who's hard to read, but rewarding if you give them enough time. Charles Olson. Um, I won't go into too much, but his writing could be. You might open a page up of a master tome and there's just 3 words in the page. Next page there's 5,000 words, right? And they're all over the page. Because he was writing a lot about Gloucester and storms, right? And the weather. So he was reflecting kind of that the chaos of it through the story of somebody named Maximus. It was an epic poem. I Maximus to Gloucester came. Then think about someone who is putting a very deliberate structure in their poem, and that's because they want it read in a very exact way. To your point with commas and dashes, etc., because they're trying to just like speak purely to this is what I want to experience. I want you to experience. They're very similar, as opposed to here's some chaos, have some chaos. If that makes sense.
Yeah. It's so interesting because there is an element of storytelling through
Mm-hmm.
all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a good sculptor and you chip away at it, you can tell an incredible story with fewer words than most.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me how, and you've mentioned this before, the metaphor, using the metaphor in poetry, using that type of writing in order to get a story told. What is the purpose of that as a poet? Is it to share, is it more for the reader, or is it all about the poet just getting it out?
Um, it's interesting. There are some poets who really want to reach the reader, and so they will think about their audience and they'll and they'll try and communicate that level. There are others who say, I trust my readers
Mhm.
and I think they like my style. I'm going to keep going with this. And that's more common, frankly. I think it's harder for poets to be commercial and to be, thinking about their markets. If you're doing that, you're writing Hallmark cards eventually. Even Robert Frost, who had a very broad appeal, kind of hated his audience. So he was he was an interesting bitter old man in a lot of ways, but he really
Yes.
was.
But
But
he knew how to write. Boy, did he know how to
yeah,
write.
he
And
did, and it reached his audience very well. I mean, he was storytelling, right? He was doing pure New England storytelling in poetic form, and there's less of that kind of narrative, almost narrative storytelling happening in contemporary poetry. Homer started it, so that's how far back tradition goes. Iliad, the Odyssey. Louise Erdrich, I would say, does a very good job with. Louise Erdrich,
no.
Erdrich. Okay, she's great. Uh, Advice to myself would be a good example. She's Native American, really interesting kind of narrative focus in her writing too.
Okay.
But it's not as common as it used to be. I suppose part of this is simply attention span.
Oh,
Right? Like,
interesting.
well, storytelling poetry can be longer. It can be,
Right.
it's you're getting involved in it, right? We're in
Right.
the age of insta poets.
What do I have? Where is it? I Somebody printed up a poem for me. Oh, where is it? It's like pages and pages and pages long because it's called The Thorn, and I want to say it's by Wordsworth. Oh, where? Yeah, Wordsworth, The Thorn. a dramatic monologue, but it's pages and pages and pages long. Like I started it and I thought this is really good, and then I got about the fourth stanza and I'm like, okay, now it's just
Right.
somebody
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
blustery, somebody that's blustery.
It can be
So
challenging. I mean, even like there's, like how many people read The Wasteland anymore, which is probably really relevant to read right now. Just consider how some of the themes are very relevant to our current state of affairs. But that said, no one's reading it. It's beautiful. It's amazing, but it's very rarely read anymore because it's a what 12, 14 pages I think ultimately more. Forget now. So storytelling, longer narrative poems, harder to get out there and be read. There are novelists I think who write in a poetic style. Cormac McCarthy, for example, um, was very much, to my mind, a poet who happened to write epic poems. In
my
you
son loves him. My son is 27, loves Cormac
know,
McCarthy.
yeah,
His favorite of all time. So he definitely
accepting of that.
has an audience.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the opening lines of the road of Blood Meridian are incredible poetry. The first few paragraphs are mind blowing. Just awesome. Melville, Moby Dick was essentially a border on poetry too, I think. But again, who's reading Moby Dick aside from me every year because I do that obsessively. It's that and Wuthering Heights.
That's
So
incredible. Well, Wuthering Heights was, yeah, that's the Moby Dick is a dense read, but almost essential as a writer to really understand how epic can happen in storytelling, how it can be so big and essential, an essential part of storytelling.
yeah, for sure. I mean,
So
and I did. I mean,
the
I exaggerate reading
symbolism,
every year. It's every couple of years, but yeah.
yeah. So
It's
that's
but
there's
symbol.
symbolism there, right? So let's talk
Oh,
about
sure, yeah,
symbolism because there's huge symbolism in Moby Dick.
yeah. Well, if you're
So,
using I mean, symbolism is yeah. I'll tell you a flashy, very funny story about Moby Dick. So there's a legendary story from Brown University that, and I know the story from my high school head of our department who was there where it happened. So, and I believed him, trustworthy man. There was a final exam in an exam seminar class, and the only question was 3 hour final was explain the significance of water in Moby Dick, the symbolism of water, and how it was used. Right, and they just spent 3 hours filling out blue books. This is back when it was a blue book, writing about the symbolism of the water, and it's everywhere, right? As water will be, um, but it's the depth of the human heart. It's all kinds of things. It's just huge. The funny story is one student wrote, "Where the hell else would you find a 2.5 ton white whale? Dash Moby Park? Question mark. I mean Moby Park. I mean Central Park." And that was their answer. The department debated it apparently all night, gave him a B, and said never do that again. Anyways, yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that's one of the classics. I mean, there's so much there. It's, I mean, from the water to Captain Ahab, you declaring if his heart was a cannon, he would rip it open and fire a cannon shell out of it. It was so full of hate.
yeah.
It's just constant,
To
right? It's
this
beautiful. Right?
final scene of him, being strapped to the whale, this
Oh yeah,
thing that
oh
he
gosh,
hated, now he was part of for all eternity
hmm
in
hmm
the
hmm
water, in the water.
yeah,
The sim,
yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah. Oh,
where they
you're
will
back in the
dwell
water.
forever.
It's
Back in the
in
water.
Central Park. In Central Park.
Central
Um,
Park.
there's a whole chapter on a desk, for God's sake. So it's just he was really into it. Um, Others who I think are good examples. I mean, William Blake. Everything was symbolic, right? It's just you think about tiger burning bright. The whole thing is about beauty and ferocity. It's a symbol for that. Um, Maya Angelou did tons of symbolism in her
Yeah.
work. I mean, well, I mean, obviously, I know when the cage bird sings. What's the cage bird a symbol of?
Right. Right.
I mean, it's not too on the nose, but it's close.
But not everybody can grasp that, which is
Mhm.
why I think a clinic like this is so important because I don't think everybody recognizes symbolism, right? And
It's well,
because not everybody's
it's
had the opportunity to study it like you have,
Mhm.
like I have. I haven't certainly not had the opportunity that you have, but I have studied it and I use it in my own writing. I use it as a marketer. I use it in my own poetry. I use it in promotion, like just promoting real words. I use symbolism. So
Mhm.
how can we as what's a neat trick? Do you have a neat trick that will help somebody who
Well, there
maybe isn't really sure and doesn't really know how to spot symbolism?
you can tend to assume that there are symbols everywhere, right? It's a very broad thing, but it's most things you look at tend to have more than one meaning. To you, for example, anybody. There's the connotative meaning, which is what it literally means, and there's the denotative meaning, what it implies. So you say rock, rock means rock. It also implies heavy. It implies weight. It implies
Solid,
danger,
sturdy. Yeah.
solid, yeah, yeah, or it can imply threat. So
Yes, yes.
it's how you kind of use it too, right? But the connotation there are words and things that choreographers are used to trigger other feelings and emotions. When you're reading poetry, you may not even be aware of it, but that's part of the trick is that they're using symbols that you will, at some level, be picking up on, so they don't have to write a whole book. You can essentially condense your paragraph down to a poem, and just have the symbols and word do double, triple meaning to get the
Yeah.
meaning across. That's really, I think, where it becomes really powerful because a simple, seemingly simple poem can have a lot more depth behind it. It is quite
Yes.
often literally to use a symbol, the tip of the iceberg and a cliche. You get both. You get both. Part two for the Russia one.
Well done.
But thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's a value pack. But the idea is that you're a, a good poet will be trying to do that. They will be trying to give what they're writing something more than a surface meaning. They want the surface to be attractive and interesting and readable and kind of bring you along, but they're hoping that you'll dive into it and say, wonder what that reference is referring to, or what is that quote from? And then you look up the quote or whatnot, and you realize the quote's from something in the Bible or something in the Torah or something in,
Right.
I don't know, the hammock for fly spreading us or whatever, or something else that ties into another story within that piece of literature or art or piece of history that you're like, wow, that really relates to what they're writing about. And it expands on the topic they're writing about. So now you've led your writer somewhere where their brain's kind of in the mindset you sort of singing them into, and now they're resonating. Now they're going deeper. Maybe the analogy is sitar, which seems like a few, but then it gets a few strings from the top, but there's multiple strings below the strings you're hitting. So if you know which strings to hit properly, the chords to hit, you'll be causing a much richer, deeper sound because there's so many chord strings beneath the strings that will be start vibrating too if you do it properly. So maybe the meaning is the strings below the strings in the sitar.
That is
I like that.
brilliant.
That
Brilliant
kind of works.
symbolism. I'm going to send you this transcript because you need to use that. That is a
I'll forget
brilliant
this.
symbolism. I know, I know. That's why we're recording.
Yeah.
So, to go back to symbolism before we leave symbolism,
You never leave
the very
symbolism, just to be
no, that's
clear.
true. The very title of this podcast is symbolic, right? Because it is representative of the human behind. It's yeah, it's actually words that are written down. Yes, they're real words, but there's also symbolism behind the meaning, the actual meaning of the title. So I appreciate you diving into that. I know we're gosh, we've gone way over time, and I can't thank you enough.
Block
One
an
last
hour off,
question
so
for
it's all good.
you.
Yeah, of course.
Well, actually, two, because I did want to talk about the little bonus thing that I added to this, but um, why, just in Martin Burns' words, and you are welcome to use all the symbolism you want. Why is poetry important?
Um, so I think it is probably the closest you get as at least for me, when I'm working through it, and I think when I'm reading it too, to that moment of understanding your own consciousness, right? And I'm doing a lot of thinking about this in general. What is consciousness? What does it mean to be, human? To your point, and there's a, there's a lot of research, and I'm an atheist who doesn't disbelieve the idea there might be some sort of thing something after this. I'm just not convinced it's good. It could be simply body dies and your conscience just keeps floating around somewhere forever, which is a terrible thought when you think about it. All right, but I am. For me, I think a lot of times poetry and music, things that resonate within you at that physical level, it can also get inside of that conscious piece that's hard to get to, the part that we don't always understand, that part that is confusing. For a side note, I posted this on Facebook, you'll see it. There's research out there that's been done that apparently our left brain acts like a like chat gpt, and that it hallucinates things and tries to give us answers even if we don't have the answer, just because I think we want an answer. And so the right brain brings the data in, the left brain makes an answer. And if you have someone whose brain has been separated through an accident, and you tell the right brain go to the house, and then the person will stand up and start walking. You ask the person, "Why are you doing this?" Then the left brain interpreted what was heard, but can't recall what was told. They say, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to the house because I'm getting a Pepsi." They made something up. They weren't sure why they were doing it, but the left brain made something up to give them an explanation for why they were doing what they were doing, because we demand answers inside of our heads. So we hallucinate the world inside of our heads, and we all see reality a bit differently because of that. Every single one
Wow.
of us is seeing the world in a different way, and we're all seeing a different reality. So for me, poetry is a way of getting to we sort of bridge all that. Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's really interesting.
Wow.
There's no
That
shelf.
explains so much when you think about perspective,
Mm-hmm.
point of view, and two people can be in a room and witness the same exact thing, but interpret it completely different,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
be raised in the same household and become totally different people because they interpreted that raising differently. And
May I add one more
it's
book recommendation on this
yes, please.
topic, just because it's amazing. It just came out, and I'm just in the process of devouring. I bought it yesterday. I'm almost done.
No way.
Um, it's not long. Um, let's see. Sebastian Jurgen. You'll know his
Okay.
name from The Perfect Storm,
Yes.
the author. Almost died and wrote about it. And there's a lot about perception of reality, consciousness in there. He's a confirmed atheist, son of a physicist, etc. But looking at data around the world of similar experiences that happen when people almost die or are close to dying, what the brain does, it's weird. And the possibility at a quantum level that consciousness might move on to something else. Not religious, not an afterlife. He raises the point, it might be terrible, you might still be stuck conscious forever, but there might be something going on. And it's just really interesting in terms of it was not poetry, I guess, but in terms of the beauty of the thought process, and the writing is phenomenal. But also the idea that and I think again the arts have some connection to that piece of this more than say sports or physical things. And that's where I think we're sort of really getting into what's happening in there.
So amazing. And there's so much more that we're going to dive into um, in future episodes. And before we get away, I do have a bonus question from you. When we were first discussing you coming on and doing this, I think I was typing and then just wrote like LA and walked away. I hit send somehow. It happens all the time where we
Oh,
accidentally
La, yeah,
send a message.
that's right.
La,
Yeah, no,
and
Peppy.
you responded with that this it reminded you. You clearly knew that I either forgot to finish this or accidentally hit send, but it reminded you of a poetic form
Hmm.
called what Lai. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Just lay or lie
I
or
think it's the French, but I think it's an umlaut. So it's the lie, lie.
lie
I don't know.
lie.
Lay. Who
So
the fuck knows?
lay.
excuse the
something like
language.
that.
Yeah,
So tell us
LAI
just
is the
quickly
thing.
about that. This is a bonus. This is a bonus.
Oh,
I've never
okay,
heard of this.
I
So,
can't write in this form because I can't write in French.
okay.
It's why I'm
So it's,
fascinated by it because it's why I have learning to write in French on my bucket list just for the challenge because apparently the way the form is set up is the French language is very specific and there are certain consonant vowel combinations you have to be able to do that are only in the French language. My understanding. So I've never tried one, but I'm
wow.
that's why I'm motivated to learn French, which is really weird when I
No,
think
it's
about it.
not weird. No, it says that you're a learner, and one of my rules for life is to stay curious,
Yeah,
and you have to keep learning, keep finding out new stuff because you don't know everything, even though you want to say you do or you think you do, or there are
yeah,
many people in
yeah,
this
yeah.
life that don't think they need to learn anymore, and I think that's you might as well pack it in because the minute you stop learning, what's the purpose? I mean, I
Yeah.
feel my purpose is just to continually learn and drive, feed that curiosity that is incessant. And so with that, I will thank you so much, Martin Burns, our resident poet here on Real Words. I really appreciate you sharing with us, and I can't
Don't
wait
forget
till
the
next
lunch.
month.
Okay, I need the food under the door. Okay,
Okay. All right. I'll make sure I
all right,
send that
all
to
right.
you. We'll see you in a month. Hopefully, there will be more books in there and more stories to tell, and we'll continue to share about poetry.
Sounds great. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in. This episode was made possible by Never Enough Media.